Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the U.S. Defiance and looked out at his fleet. What he saw would make any other species laugh. The ships floating in the darkness of space looked like flying junkyards. Metal plates covered holes in their hulls. Cables ran along the outside where internal systems had failed. Some ships had parts from 3 different alien species welded onto their frames. The Defiance itself was no better. Jake could hear the engines making sounds that engines should never make. The lights on his command console flickered every few seconds. When he pressed a button, he had to hit it twice because the first press rarely worked. The air recycling system made a grinding noise that meant it would probably fail within the week. "Admiral, we're getting reports from the fleet," said Captain Lisa Barnes over the radio. Her voice crackled with static because their communication systems were older than most civilizations. "The Resilience is running on backup power again. My chief engineer says our main reactor is held together with metal paste and hope." Jake rubbed his tired eyes. The Resilience was one of their better ships. If it was having problems, he could only imagine what the rest of the fleet looked like. What about the Tenacity? Commander Rick Stone reports that his weapon systems are offline. They've been running on emergency power for 3 months now. His crew is manually loading the missile tubes because the automatic systems died last year. Jake nodded. This was normal for the human fleet. They had been fighting a war of survival for so long that keeping their ships running was like performing miracles every day. Their engineers were not trained in schools. They learned by taking apart broken machines and putting them back together. Their pilots flew ships that should have been scrapped decades ago. Their soldiers fought with weapons that other species would put in museums, but they were still alive. After 200 years of being pushed around by stronger alien races, humanity was still here. Their ships might look like garbage, but they still flew. Their weapons might be ancient, but they still fired. Their people might be tired, but they still fought. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission," said Lieutenant Amy Watson from the communication station. She had to bang on her console 3 times before the message came through clearly. "It's from the Galactic Coalition." Jake's stomach dropped. The Galactic Coalition was everything humanity was not. They had perfect ships that never broke down. They had weapons that could destroy planets. They had technology that seemed like magic to human eyes. They ruled most of the galaxy with an iron fist, and they had been slowly closing in on human space for years. "Put it through," Jake said. The main screen flickered to life. The image was blurry because their display system was failing, but Jake could make out the figure speaking. It was tall and thin, with skin that looked like living crystal. Its voice was cold and mechanical. "Attention, primitive species," the alien said. "I am Supreme Commander Zix Thara of the Galactic Coalition Enforcement Division. Your kind has been deemed unworthy of independent existence. Your technology is outdated. Your ships are scrap metal. Your weapons are toys. You will surrender your territory immediately and submit to proper galactic governance." Jake looked around his bridge. His crew was listening to every word. These people had spent their entire lives keeping humanity alive against impossible odds. They had fixed the unfixable, fought the unbeatable, and never given up hope. Now some alien with perfect technology wanted them to just quit. "You have 72 hours to respond," the alien continued. "If you do not surrender, the full might of the Coalition Enforcement Fleet will be deployed against you. Our ships number in the thousands. Each one is more powerful than your entire fleet combined. Resistance is not only futile, it is laughable." The transmission ended. The bridge was quiet except for the usual sounds of failing systems. Jake could hear the air recycling unit grinding away. He could hear sparks from a damaged electrical panel. He could hear the engines making that worrying noise they had been making for months. "Well," said Captain Barnes over the radio, "that was rude." "Admiral," said Commander Stone from the Tenacity, My weapons might not work, but I'll be damned if I'm going to let some crystal-faced alien tell me what to do. Jake smiled for the first time in weeks. This was why humanity had survived. Not because of their technology or their ships or their weapons. They survived because when someone told them they could not do something, they did it anyway. When someone said they were too weak, they proved them wrong. When someone said they should give up, they fought harder. All ships, this is Admiral Morrison, Jake said into his radio. Set course for the edge of human space. We're going to meet these coalition ships. Sir, said Lieutenant Watson, our ships can barely fly. Half our weapons don't work. Our crews are exhausted. How are we supposed to fight the most advanced fleet in the galaxy? Jake looked out at his rusted, broken, patched-together fleet. These ships had been fighting for so long that they were more spare parts than original equipment. Their crews had been pushed to the limit and beyond. Everything about them screamed that they should not be able to compete with modern technology. But they were still here, still flying, still fighting. We'll figure it out, Jake said. We always do. The human fleet began to move. Slowly, because their engines were old. Carefully, because their navigation systems were unreliable. But they moved forward toward a battle that everyone said they could not win. Behind them, Earth grew smaller in the darkness. Ahead of them, the unknown waited. And somewhere in between, humanity prepared to do what it did best, the impossible. The Coalition Enforcement Fleet arrived at the edge of human space like a storm of light and metal. Fleet Commander Zixthara stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and watched as his ships dropped out of hyperspace. Each vessel was a work of art. Their hulls were made from materials that bent light around them. Their engines used the power of artificial stars. Their weapons could crack planets in half. The Eternal Dominion alone was 3 miles long and carried enough firepower to destroy entire solar systems. Around it, thousands of other ships took their positions. Cruisers that could phase in and out of reality. Destroyers that moved faster than light, even in normal space. Fighters that were controlled by artificial minds smarter than most organic species. Report, Zixthara commanded. All ships in position, Commander, replied his tactical officer. Sensors show the human fleet approaching. They number approximately 800 vessels. Zixthara made a sound that might have been laughter if his species could laugh. 800 rust buckets against the finest fleet in the galaxy. This will be over quickly. On the other side of space, engineer Pete Collins was crawling through the maintenance tunnels of the U-East Defiance with a toolbox full of spare parts. Most of the parts did not belong to his ship. Some came from alien vessels they had salvaged. Others were made in human factories from materials they had mined from dead planets. A few were so old that Pete was not sure what they were originally designed for. Come on, you piece of junk, Pete muttered as he tried to connect a power relay. The connection sparked and went dead. He tried again. This time it held, but he could smell something burning. That was normal for human ships. Something was always burning. His radio crackled to life. Pete, this is Amy Watson down in Engineering Bay 3. I need you to look at the main reactor. It's making that noise again. Pete sighed. Amy was the chief mechanic on the U-East Fortitude, one of their escort ships. If she was calling him for help, things were really bad. Amy could fix anything with enough time and spare parts. She once rebuilt an entire engine using parts from a coffee machine and a washing unit. What kind of noise? Pete asked. The kind that means we're all going to die if I can't fix it in the next hour. Pete began crawling toward the reactor section. This was life on a human ship. Every day was a race against falling apart. Every repair was temporary. Every system was one failure away from complete breakdown. But somehow they kept flying. The Coalition fleet intercepted human communications and listened with amazement. Their translation computers worked perfectly. But what they heard made no sense. Reactor 3 is overheating again. Can someone bring me more cooling paste? Our navigation computer died. I'm flying by looking at the stars and guessing. The artificial gravity is backwards in Section 12. Everyone is walking on the ceiling. My weapons won't fire automatically. We're loading the missiles by hand. Commander Zixthara studied the reports with confusion. Their technology is even worse than we thought. How do these primitives even survive in space? Perhaps it's some kind of trick, sir, suggested his tactical officer. Maybe they want us to think they're weak. Look at their ships, Zixthara said, pointing to the main display. The human fleet was visible now. Each vessel looked like it had been built in a scrapyard. Metal plates covered holes. Cables ran along the outside of hulls. Some ships were clearly made from parts of other ships welded together. These are not warships. These are flying disasters. What the Coalition did not understand was that human ships were disasters that refused to die. Every patch and cable and spare part represented someone refusing to give up. Every jury-rigged system was proof that humans would find a way to keep going, no matter what. Captain Danny Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the UE's Victory and listened to his orders. All ships, this is Admiral Morrison. Begin Lazarus Protocol. I repeat, begin Lazarus Protocol. Danny had been hoping he would never hear those words. Lazarus Protocol was humanity's most desperate strategy. It was named after the old Earth story, about a man who came back from the dead. The protocol was designed to make the human fleet look even more broken than it already was. You heard the Admiral, Danny told his crew. Start broadcasting on all frequencies. I want every Coalition ship to hear exactly how hopeless we are. Across the human fleet, ships began transmitting their problems to each other. But they also began broadcasting something else, music, old songs from Earth that had been carried across the stars for centuries. Classical symphonies played next to rock songs. Folk music mixed with electronic beats. The entire electromagnetic spectrum filled with human voices singing about love and loss and hope and home. Coalition fleet intercepted these transmissions and tried to understand them. Their computers analyzed the mathematical patterns in the music. Their psychologists studied the emotional content of the lyrics. Their military experts looked for hidden battle codes. They found nothing useful. Just the sounds of a species that sang while their ships fell apart around them. Commander, said the tactical officer, should we attack now? Their defenses appear to be completely inadequate. Zixthara considered this. His fleet could destroy the humans in minutes. Their weapons were superior in every way. Their shields were impenetrable. Their ships were faster and stronger and smarter. But something bothered him. He had conquered hundreds of species. All of them had tried to hide their weaknesses. All of them had pretended to be stronger than they were. These humans were broadcasting their failures for everyone to hear. Either they were the most foolish species in the galaxy, or they knew something he did not. Hold position, Zixthara ordered. Let them come to us. I want to see what these primitives think they can accomplish. The human fleet continued its approach. Their ships limped through space like wounded animals. Their communications were full of technical problems and system failures. Their music played across the void like the last song of a dying species. And somewhere in the darkness between the two fleets, humanity prepared to show the galaxy what happened when you underestimated the power of refusing to quit. The battle began with a display of power that should have ended the war in minutes. Commander Zixthara gave the order to fire, and the Coalition fleet unleashed weapons that tore holes in space itself. Energy beams that could melt asteroids reached across the void toward the human ships. Missiles that bent reality around them streaked toward their targets. The very fabric of spacetime rippled with destructive force. The human fleet should have been vaporized instantly. But something strange happened instead. Lieutenant Sam Parker sat at his weapons station on the UES Courage and watched the enemy fire coming toward them. He had been trained to operate weapons that were older than his grandfather. His targeting computer was so slow that he usually aimed by eye. His missiles were so simple that they flew in straight lines like bullets. But Sam had grown up on a farm before joining the fleet. His grandmother had taught him to look for patterns in everything. She used to make quilts with designs that followed mathematical rules she never learned in school. She just saw how things fit together. As Sam watched the Coalition shields deflecting human weapons, he saw something familiar. The energy barriers flickered in a rhythm. Not random, but like his grandmother's quilting patterns. There were spaces between the beats, gaps in the protection that opened and closed in regular cycles. "Captain Rodriguez," Sam called out. "I think I see something." "What is it, son?" "Their shields have a pattern, like a song with a beat. If we time our shots just right, we might be able to get through." Captain Rodriguez looked at his weapons officer like the young man had lost his mind. But then he remembered that this was the human way. When the smart thing did not work, they tried the crazy thing. "Show me," Rodriguez said. Sam began firing his ancient missiles not at the Coalition ships, but at the spaces between their shield pulses. The first few missed. The fourth one got through and actually hit an enemy cruiser. It did not do much damage, but it hit. "Did you see that?" Sam shouted into his radio. "I got through their shields." Across the human fleet, other gunners began trying the same thing. They watched for patterns in the enemy defenses. They timed their shots like musicians keeping rhythm. They aimed for the gaps between beats. Dr. Helen Murphy was the chief scientist on the UES Discovery, and she was trying to understand why anything was working at all. Her instruments were so old that they measured things in units that most species had forgotten. Her computers were so slow that she had to do most calculations in her head, but that gave her an advantage the Coalition did not expect. "Admiral Morrison," Helen called over the radio. "I think I know why we're not all dead yet." "I'm listening, Doc." "Their sensors are too good. They're designed to detect exotic particles and dimensional distortions and all sorts of advanced technology. But our weapons are so simple that the sensors don't even notice them." Jake Morrison tried to understand what she was saying. "You mean we're too primitive for their defenses?" "Exactly. It's like trying to catch flies with a net designed for whales. Their shields are programmed to stop weapons that use antimatter and quantum fields. Our missiles just use chemical explosives and metal. Their computers don't recognize them as threats until they hit." This was the moment when the Coalition fleet realized they were not fighting a technologically inferior enemy. They were fighting something they had never encountered before. An enemy that used their own simplicity as a weapon. Captain Tony Griffin commanded a squadron of human fighters from his ship, the UES Guardian. His fighters looked like antiques compared to the sleek Coalition interceptors. They had no artificial intelligence, no self-repair systems, no advanced targeting computers. Just human pilots making split-second decisions based on instinct and experience. "Blue Squadron, follow my lead," Tony called to his pilots. "Remember, we're not trying to outfly their computers. We're trying to confuse them." The human fighters began flying in patterns that made no logical sense. They wasted fuel on unnecessary turns. They flew too close to their own ships. They used debris as cover when empty space would have been safer. They did everything wrong according to military textbooks, and it worked. The Coalition's artificial intelligence systems were programmed to predict logical behavior. They could calculate exactly where an enemy would fly based on optimal tactics and fuel efficiency. But the human pilots were not flying optimally. They were flying desperately, creatively, and completely unpredictably. Fighter pilot Bobby Clark pulled his ship into a spin that should have torn it apart. His engines were overheating and his navigation was failing, but he managed to get behind a coalition interceptor and destroy it with weapons that were barely more advanced than cannons. "Did you see that?" Bobby laughed over the radio. "I just shot down a ship that cost more than my entire planet." The coalition fleet began to adapt, but slowly. Their perfect systems needed time to analyze these new tactics. Their artificial intelligences had to rewrite their programming to account for irrational behavior. The humans did not give them time. Commander Alex Turner led a group of assault ships toward the coalition's main formation. His ships were falling apart around him. The UE Striker had lost its artificial gravity. The U's Hammer was venting atmosphere from 3 hull breaches. The UE's Thunder was flying backwards because its engines were mounted wrong after the last repair, but they kept fighting. "All ships, ignore the big targets," Alex commanded. "Go for their supply ships. Their pretty fleet needs constant maintenance. Let's see how well they fight when they run out of spare parts." This was another thing the coalition had not expected. Human tactics were not based on destroying the strongest enemy ships first. They were based on survival. Humans had learned to fight by targeting whatever kept their enemies running. The coalition supply vessels were heavily shielded but lightly armed. They were designed to support the main fleet, not fight desperate humans who were willing to ram them if necessary. Medical Officer Dr. Grace Allen worked frantically in the medical bay of the UES Defiance as wounded crew members were brought in. She had medical equipment that other species would consider torture devices. Her surgical tools were crude. Her medicines were basic compounds that barely worked, but she saved lives that should have been lost. She kept crews fighting when their ships should have been floating graveyards. She performed miracles with bandages and determination. "How are we doing, Doc?" Admiral Morrison asked when he visited the medical bay. "We're alive," Grace replied, not looking up from the patient she was treating. "That's more than anyone expected an hour ago." Around them, the battle continued to rage. The coalition fleet was beginning to realize that they were not fighting an inferior enemy. They were fighting something completely different. Something that turned weakness into strength and desperation into tactics. For the first time in their military history, the coalition was learning what it meant to be surprised. The battle was turning into something the coalition had never experienced before. Their perfect formations were breaking apart. Their artificial intelligence systems were failing to predict human actions. For the first time in 1,000 years, the coalition fleet was being pushed back by an enemy they should have destroyed in minutes. Engineer Kate Johnson was deep in the engine room of the UES Resilience when the ship took a direct hit. The lights went out, the gravity failed. Emergency alarms screamed warnings that nobody needed to hear because they could feel the ship dying around them. "Kate, I need more power," Captain Barnes shouted over the radio. "Their cruiser is coming." "Around for another attack." Kate looked at her control panel. Half the systems were offline. The main reactor was running at 20% capacity. The backup generators were overloaded. Every safety protocol said the ship should shut down immediately. Before it exploded, Kate turned off the safety protocols. She rerouted power from life support to the engines. She bypassed 17 different warning systems. She pushed the reactor past its design limits and held it there with pure determination. The ship should have blown up. Instead, it surged forward with more power than it had ever had before. "Barnes, you've got full power," Kate called out. "But I can't promise how long it will last." The Resilience fired its weapons with energy that should not have existed. The ancient missiles struck a coalition cruiser and actually damaged its shields. The enemy ship began to retreat, confused by how a dying human vessel could suddenly fight back. This was happening all across the human fleet. Engineers were performing miracles. Pilots were flying ships that should not fly. Soldiers were fighting with weapons that should not work. Pilot Bobby Clark was in his fighter when both engines failed. He was drifting in space, waiting to die, when he saw a Coalition interceptor approaching. The enemy ship was sleek and perfect, controlled by an artificial mind that never made mistakes. Bobby had an idea that was completely insane. He fired his maneuvering thrusters and aimed his dead fighter directly at the enemy ship, the Coalition. Pilot's computer calculated that the human was attempting to ram. It began evasive maneuvers, trying to avoid the collision. But Bobby was not trying to ram. At the last second, he fired his ejection seat. The small rocket launched him out of his fighter and directly into the enemy ship's flight path. The Coalition interceptor, designed to avoid large objects, could not react fast enough to avoid one. Human in a spacesuit, Bobby crashed through the enemy cockpit and landed inside the ship. The Coalition pilot was so shocked that it forgot to fight back. Bobby pulled out his sidearm, a weapon so simple it was basically a metal tube that shot bullets, and disabled the enemy's control systems. "This is Bobby Clark," he reported over the radio. "I just captured an enemy fighter. Anyone know how to fly one of these things?" The human fleet was full of stories like this. Ordinary people doing impossible things because they refused to accept that anything was truly impossible. They did not have the best technology, but they had something the Coalition could not understand. They had each other. Commander Alex Turner was coordinating an attack on a Coalition battleship when his own ship lost communications. The radio was dead. The computer networks were down. He could not talk to his squadron or receive orders from Command. In any other fleet, this would have ended the attack. But the human pilots had been working together for so long that they could communicate without words. They used hand signals visible through their cockpit windows. They flashed their lights in patterns that meant "follow me," or "attack now," or "watch out." Alex pointed toward the enemy battleship and held up 3 fingers. His pilots understood. They would attack in 3 waves, each one drawing the enemy's attention while the others struck from different angles. The attack succeeded not because of superior planning or better technology, but because the human pilots trusted each other completely. They knew that if one of them said attack, the others would follow. They knew that if one of them was in trouble, the others would help. The Coalition battleship's artificial intelligence could not understand this kind of coordination. It was designed to fight enemies that communicated through radio and computer networks. It could not predict tactics based on trust and friendship. Dr. Grace Allen was treating wounded crew members when she noticed something strange. The humans were not just surviving injuries that should have killed them. They were getting back to work faster than should have been possible. "Admiral, I think I know why our people are performing so well," Grace reported to Morrison. "What do you mean, Doc?" "They're not just fighting for themselves. They're fighting for each other. When someone gets hurt, they don't think about their own pain. They think about their friends who are still in danger." Grace was right. The human fleet was not just a collection of individual ships. It was a family. When one ship was in trouble, the others came to help. When one crew member was injured, the others worked harder to make up for it. Medical Officer Dr. Grace Allen kept working even when her own ship was damaged. Supply Coordinator Mac Thompson found ways to get ammunition to ships that were surrounded by enemies. Communications Officer Linda Hayes kept the human fleet talking to each other even when their radio systems were failing. The Coalition fleet was beginning to understand that they were not fighting a military force. They were fighting a community. Every human ship was connected to every other human ship by bonds that their artificial intelligence could not analyze or predict. Commander Zix Thara watched the battle reports with growing concern. His fleet was still larger and more powerful than the human force. His weapons were still superior. His ships were still faster and stronger, but they were losing. "How is this possible?" he asked his tactical officer. "Our technology is centuries ahead of theirs. Our fleet is 10 times larger. Our weapons are infinitely more powerful. Sir, I think the problem is that we're fighting the wrong war, the tactical officer replied. We're trying to defeat their technology, but their technology is not what makes them dangerous. Then what does? The tactical officer looked at the displays showing human ships that should have been destroyed hours ago still fighting with weapons. That should not work. They're dangerous because they don't know when to quit. The human fleet was proving something that the Coalition had forgotten. The most advanced technology in the universe was worthless if the people using it did not have the will to push it beyond its limits. The most powerful weapons were useless if the soldiers firing them did not believe in what they were fighting for. Humanity's greatest strength was not their ships or their weapons or their technology. It was their refusal to give up. It was their willingness to try impossible things. It was their ability to work together when everything else failed. The Coalition was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who fights not because they think they can win, but because they know they cannot lose. The moment of final decision came when the Coalition fleet regrouped for what should have been their finishing blow. Commander Zix Thara had lost 30 ships to an enemy that should not have been able to scratch his paint. His perfect formations were in chaos. His artificial intelligence systems were sending error reports that made no sense, but he still had thousands of ships. He still had weapons that could destroy planets. He still had the most advanced fleet in the galaxy. All ships prepare for final assault, Zix Thara commanded. Target every human vessel simultaneously. End this madness now. Admiral Jake Morrison watched the Coalition fleet forming up for their attack. His own fleet was in worse shape than ever. Half his ships were barely flying. Most of his weapons were offline. His crews were exhausted beyond the point where humans should be able to function. It was time for the most desperate gamble in human history. All ships, this is Admiral Morrison, Jake announced over the radio. Prepare for Protocol Zero. I repeat. Protocol Zero is now active. Protocol Zero was not in any military handbook. It was not taught in any academy. It was a strategy so insane that it could only work once, and only if everyone trusted each other completely. Sir, said Captain Barnes, over the radio, are you sure about this? Protocol Zero means we intentionally damage our own ships. I'm sure, Jake replied. We've come this far by doing things that shouldn't work. Time to do one more impossible thing. Across the human fleet, crews began following orders that seemed like suicide. They opened their fuel tanks and vented precious gas into space. They deliberately overloaded their reactors until they began leaking radiation. They fired their weapons into empty space, wasting ammunition they could not replace. To anyone watching, it looked like the human fleet was destroying itself. Navigator Susan Taylor was on the bridge of the UES Defiance when the ship began shaking apart around her. The deliberate damage was making every system fail at once. The lights were flickering. The gravity was cutting in and out. The air was getting thin as atmosphere leaked through planned hull breaches. Susan, I need you to guide us through this, Admiral Morrison said. Our navigation computers are offline. Our sensors are dead. Can you get us where we need to go using just the stars? Susan looked out at space through a cracked window. She had learned to navigate the old way, using star positions and mathematical calculations her grandmother had taught her. It was slow and difficult, but it worked when everything else failed. I can do it, Admiral, Susan said. But you need to tell me where we're going. Right into the middle of their fleet. The Coalition fleet watched in amazement as the human ships created a massive cloud of debris and electromagnetic interference. Fuel vapor mixed with metal fragments. Radiation leaked from damaged reactors. The space between the two fleets became a chaotic mess that blocked sensors and confused targeting systems. What are they doing? Zixthara demanded. Are they trying to create a smokescreen? Sir, our sensors cannot penetrate the interference, his tactical officer reported. We're tracking dozens of human ships, but the readings make no sense. Some ships appear to be in 3 places at once. What the coalition did not understand was that the chaos was intentional. The human fleet was using their own debris field as camouflage. They were hiding in the electromagnetic noise their damaged ships created. They were turning their destruction into concealment. Weapons Officer Carl Evans coordinated the final attack from his station on the UES Victory. His targeting computer was dead. His weapons were overheating. His ship was falling apart around him. But he had something the coalition could not counter. He had perfect timing. All ships, this is Carl Evans, he announced. When I give the signal, every ship fires everything they have left. We get one shot at this. Make it count. The human fleet moved through their own debris field like ghosts. Susan Taylor guided them using nothing but star positions and dead reckoning. The ships flew in formation even though they could not see each other. They coordinated their attack even though their radios were jammed by their own interference. The coalition fleet never saw them coming. Fire! Carl shouted at every human ship. Fired at the same moment. Missiles launched from vessels that should have been dead. Energy weapons discharged from ships that had no power. The attack came from directions the coalition had not expected. Using weapons they had dismissed as harmless, the concentrated fire struck the coalition flagship, the Eternal Dominion. The ship's shields deflected most of the damage, but not all of it. For the first time in the battle, Zixthara felt his perfect ship shake under enemy fire. Impossible, he whispered. How did they coordinate that attack without communications? The answer was something the coalition could never understand. The human fleet had fought together for so long that they moved like one organism. They knew each other's thoughts. They anticipated each other's actions. They worked together not because computers told them to, but because they chose to. The coalition fleet began to retreat. Not because they were defeated, but because they were facing something they had never encountered before. An enemy that got stronger when they should get weaker. An enemy that fought harder when they should give up. An enemy that turned their own destruction into victory. All ships withdraw to safe distance, Zixthara ordered. He could not believe he was giving the command to retreat, but his perfect fleet was being torn apart by flying scrap metal. Human fleet limped home through space, more damaged than ever before. The U's defiance was held together by emergency patches and hope. The U's resilience was flying backwards because her engines were mounted wrong. The UES Victory had no weapons left and was navigating by looking at the stars. But they were alive. They had faced the most advanced fleet in the galaxy and survived. They had proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon in the universe is the refusal to quit. Admiral Morrison stood on his bridge and looked out at his fleet. These ships would need months of repairs. These crews would need time to rest and heal. But they had done something incredible. They had shown the galaxy that humanity could not be conquered. 3 days later, the coalition sent new ambassadors to human space. Not with threats, but with requests for trade agreements. Other alien species began asking questions about human engineering. How did such primitive technology accomplish the impossible? The answer was simple. Human technology was not about having the best parts or the most advanced systems. It was about people who refused to let those systems fail. It was about crews who fixed the unfixable and flew the unflyable and fought the unbeatable. It was about the human spirit, which turned out to be the most advanced technology of all. Jake Morrison walked through his damaged ship and listened to the sounds of his crew making repairs. Somewhere in the background, someone was playing music from old Earth, the same songs that had filled space during the battle. Songs about home and hope and never giving up. The galaxy had learned a new lesson. Never underestimate a species that turns impossible into hold my beer and watch this. And in the depths of space, humanity's rusted fleet continued to fly, held together by determination and the unshakable belief that tomorrow would be better than today.